I'm Fenella France, Chief of Preservation Research and Testing Division, and it gives me inordinate pleasure to have our first in-person TOPS in 2 years. So just absolutely delighted, and to have as our first speaker Sarah Kenderline, full disclosure, fellow Kiwi. And Sarah Kenderline researches at the forefront of interactive and immersive experiences for galleries, libraries, archives and museums. She's a professor at the École Polytechnique Federale de Lausanne, forgive my pronunciation, in Switzerland, where she's built the Laboratory for Experimental Museology, exploring the convergence of cultural heritage, imaging technologies, immersive visualization, digital aesthetics, and cultural big data. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over and look forward to her incredible presentation.
Thank you very much. So thank you very much for having me here today. I'd like to thank Fenella, of course, and also Bobby and the wonderful AV team who have set up this enterprise. The title of this speech, A Compendium for Computational Museology, explores a scaffold that unites machine intelligence with data curation, ontology with visualization, and communities of publics and practitioners with embodied interaction through immersive interfaces. Computational museology allows us to conceive new trajectories that link all forms of cultural materiality, objects, knowledge systems, representation, and participation. And this research harnesses the potential for computational practices within the museological and we could say the GLAM sector at large, underpinned by the positional shifts occurring in digital archives, from object orientations to computing with multiple dimensions, segmentation, analytics, and visualization. So what we see today is this shift from users who used to appreciate physical assets, libraries know this more than anybody else, of course, to digital assets. And these are to be uploaded, downloaded, visualized, shared. Users who treat institutions not as storehouses of physical objects, but rather as data sets to be manipulated. And this presentation is really trying to explore the ways in which the mechanistic descriptions of database logic can be transformed, and computation can become experiential, spatial, and materialized, embedded and embodied in the everyday workings of museums and the wider GLAM sector. It was at the birth of the information age in the 1950s that the prominent designer Professor György Kepes at MIT said information abundance should be a landscape of the senses that organizes both perception and practice. This felt order, he said, should be a source of beauty, data transformed from its measured quantities and recreated as sensed forms exhibiting the properties of harmony, rhythm, and proportion. So for 20 odd years, I've been designing and building large-scale interactive frameworks for public engagement with cultural heritage. Initially, this was located at Museum Victoria in Melbourne, Australia, where I started to design and build these large systems for experiences with mass public. I then was propelled to start to collaborate with universities to help sustain this kind of infrastructure across the GLAM sector. So hardware integration and computer graphics and computer science became more and more essential to sustaining this for the museum sector. I co-established the Applied Laboratory for Interactive Visualization and Embodiment. This was a 1,000 square meter lab in Hong Kong at the Science Park. I returned to Australia to build the Expanded Perception and Interaction Centre at the University of New South Wales. So just so you know what you're looking at here on the right-hand side of the screen, this small 7-meter diameter panorama is comprised of 56 projectors and a 29 computer cluster. So it's 120 million pixels in 3D. It's at the edge of human visual acuity. And it was designed to solve visualization problems for complexity and big data in the sciences as well as the humanities. So that's a kind of spectrum that I'm working in. Now it's the EPFL, which is a much easier way to pronounce the École Politique. Another 1,500 square meter space with 12 large-scale immersive visualization systems. And these offer us strategies for multi-sensory engagement, emphasizing human-to-human as well as human-to-machine interaction. And they give us powerful ways to reformulate narrative in a digital context. Some of the words that are used often in these systems are things like post-cinematic or future cinema as well. It encompasses a wide range. The type of data that we're interested in, this is laser scanning data, which of course has collects billions of points to represent places, such as these heads that was scanned by the Scottish 10. Obviously, you recognize Mount Rushmore. We can create precious objects in 3D and peer inside to see what was previously unseen. We can capture art with this, which is a Cult Lab 3D robotic photogrammetry arm with super high fidelity color matching, I guess, which is a more or less automated process. The robot goes round and it seeks all the image sections that it hasn't been able to capture. So it's a very intelligent computer vision system. We just recently got one in my laboratory. We can also capture art in a way that allows us to zoom into the tiniest brushstroke and reveal more than the naked eye can see. So all of these techniques, of course, are familiar to you. We work a lot with machine learning, and this is the Nefertari's tomb. It was captured with just 8 hours of photography by a single camera. It's 4,000 images, and machine learning was used to remove all the halogen lighting, the air conditioning units, and the staircases. It's about 6 weeks of post-production, and then we have a cloud of billions of points, and then this is transferred to our 360 3D system at 40 million pixels, and it's the world's first demonstrator of Unreal Engine's end display technology, which is a synchronization framework for clusters of computers. So you can see here the enormous fidelity that can be achieved. This is shot in a games engine, so it looks a bit chaotic. But the imaging techniques that we are using are becoming increasingly powerful, and we see a lot of convergence in that sector. One of the areas I won't talk too much about today, but I work a lot in, is intangible cultural heritage and various forms of motion capture, motion over time analytics, everything to do with embodied knowledge systems. So the themes, we'll just look briefly at these kinesthetic inhabited cultural spaces, move on to computational archives, bit of deep mapping. I'll introduce an exhibition that I also run an art science museum on the campus, and this is a recent exhibition of ours. And then if we have time, we can look at some of this embodied knowledge material. So interfaces to the cultural imaginary. So this is the Prince of Wales Museum. It was adopted as the epicenter of an artistic exploration that specifically focuses on the ceiling architectures of Mumbai's contemporary and heritage buildings, and transforms into a kind of urban celestial imaginary. So Mumbai's architectural heritage is really unrivaled in India. It's got the largest representation of grand neo-Gothic style buildings, numerous examples of Indo-Saracenic buildings, and also the world's largest concentration of Art Deco buildings for any city in the world. We shot 160 gigapixel images throughout the city. This is the Baujilard Museum, but also contemporary buildings. This is Terminal 2, the new Mumbai airport. We took the 6-meter dome from my laboratory and placed it under the 60-foot ceiling of the Prince of Wales Museum, the dome ceiling, and it allowed about 2,000 people a day to rediscover their city with fresh eyes. These are very open frameworks for experience, and they're also quite democratic because so many of these buildings are, even though they are heritage status, they're socially exclusive. And so this was a moment that would bring all of society together in this wonderful museum. It uses a computer vision algorithm that it randomly selects any one of these images or two of these images and creates a unique transition every time. So in effect, you can lie there all day and never see the same thing twice. And the concept of an experiential domed environment really emerged from the attempts to simulate the spherical gestalt of the human visual field and was designed to exploit and extend sensory perception. So another dome work which was done in collaboration with the National Museum of Australia, Travelling Kankarangalpa, which is the songline of the Seven Sisters. And this songline portrays one of the most defining and predominant meta-narratives chronicled in ancient mainland Australia, but until this time had never been told in the public domain. And it was really a very long 7-year negotiation with the Anugu elders when they came to the museum and said, our songline is dying. We want to bring it into the public domain to ensure its survival. So the first work involved imaging a sacred cave which had never ever had a single photograph taken of it before. Time-lapse photography, drone-based panoramas, gigapixel imaging, as well as ambisonics. And this allowed visitors intimate views of the stories that were contained in this cave in its sandstone folds. And this digital dome project, or the dome rather, was used in this project to simultaneously express the sphere of the world around us, not only the sky above, but actually the ground below. And archaic dome theatres are typified by rock art caves found throughout Australia, and the theorist Nick Lambert argues that these ancient caves, where etchings and paintings were animated by fire and torchlight, represent the beginnings of a cinematic imaginary, proto-cinema as it's called, and these were arguably the first immersive experiences of humankind. The second journey immersed visitors in a series of projected artworks of the songline made by the custodians of the narrative. As the Seven Sisters are traveling countries. So the elders are Matu artists. They make these wonderful trussed grass jumpy figures. And this is a ceremony that they had where they are singing these ancestral beings off country. Because they've been collected by the National Museum. And of course, it's quite poignant when you look at a joyous image like that, and then you see what happens to these poor objects when they become our collection items. Anyway, we made some very nice 3D images of these, and then we worked with the Matu artists. They painted a series of full dome images. This project took some years. And these depicted various parts of the narrative. They're very complex images and had to be extensively interpreted so that we could then animate them in the full dome. I think one of the other, it's not shown in this image so much, but one of the other extraordinary findings for me was that many of these painters can paint pure mathematical fisheye distortion on the ground like that. So they understand that hemispherical space really well. So if you're painting a tree, the tree will appear upright, not all curvy. So great skills there. And then these were animated for another show. So this is the opening from this exhibition, and it was really won all these awards, and it's now touring all over the world. And what was really important was this the gestation of the project and the relationship with the Indigenous people. And it was really this major change in how you can deal with Indigenous knowledge and sacred knowledge in the public domain. So it was a really important project. One of the other good outcomes is I wrote a research grant to buy a dome which was shared by 5 museums. And then when this became so successful, they went and bought their own full dome system from my lab and were able to tour it around the world. So I'm a firm believer that the research community need to enable this kind of infrastructure for the GLAM sector to enable them to experiment. And then they may feel more empowered to do something serious in this domain. So it's currently in Berlin at the Humboldt Forum, and it will go to the Quai Branly, which is a museum in Paris, next. So now we're on a journey to the Dunhuang caves in the Gobi Desert of northernmost China. This is at the nexus of the Silk Road. It's a World Heritage Site. 492 caves are carved into this cliff face. Inside are 45,000 square meters of painted frescoes and over 2,000 statues crafted by Buddhist monks over a period of 1,000 years. This sublime art treasury is like nothing else in the Chinese Buddhist world. And most of these caves are permanently closed to the public. And so the digital, and that's to ensure their preservation from a kind of microclimate change. And the digital is the only mode of visitation in an era characterized by heritage at risk, and this only increases daily. There's an enormous preservation effort underway there. The Dunhuang Academy have about 60 full-time photographers. It's camera array photography. It's not rocket science, but they also do laser scanning. And when we met them, we combined their camera array photography with their laser scan because they'd never done that before, and trained the academy in that. It takes about 3 months to image a single cave. We made a series of works designed to activate the kinesthetic spatial responses of the viewers. And this one, Pure Land Augmented Reality Edition, was originally done for Art Basel in Hong Kong. Visitors are walking inside the digital model using this tablet as a window on the world, if you like. And it's at exactly 1-to-1 scale with the real cave. And an interface like this tells us a lot about how people work with this in the public domain. So it's not about giving everybody their own device. It's actually about how you harness the social dynamics of groups, often of strangers, in these systems. So that's one aspect. Also, that these interfaces need to work for young kids, for middle-aged ladies, for grandmother and grandchild. Grandmother abandons the grandchild. No ageism in these interfaces. And the third most noteworthy quality is that of virtual tourism. Here the wife takes her iPad from her handbag and she's filming her husband's experience as if they were really there. So it was also reformed as it's a pyramidal cave, and it was reformed for a full dome at the World Economic Forum. And also in 360 3D. And this 360 3D version actually came to the Smithsonian Institute for the Freya Sackler 75th year birthday party celebrations, when it was the Freya Sackler. And so they built a huge tent for it because it's a big system, 10 meters wide, 4.5 meters high, 360. 3D system, and it was a very successful undertaking. So it's been in your town. I think what's important to note is that these data sets are so malleable. You can transform them in so many ways. Interfaces also embrace the spatial formats of their originating media, and the Amaki Navigator enables visitors a spatial temporal form of navigation. It was designed for 3 hand scrolls, the poetry contest of the 12 animals, and was completed for a museum in Zurich, the Rietberg Museum, in a hand scroll exhibition. they're 17th century scrolls. And what's interesting about them is they're about 12 meters long each. And so we have a 12-meter long navigation system on which to display these, and dynamic touch screen reveals these images on this motorized platform. And you can unfold the reading from right to left, which is a traditional way, but you can also move between points of interest in individual scrolls. So it was ultra high resolution imaging done by the Chester Beatty Library, which is where these images are stored. A phase 1 camera, I think. And here you see it moving, or you will see it moving along. So it enables this unparalleled intimacy with the materiality of the object, pigments and so on. And that is it moving. It's hard to see in the video, but the screen is actually moving along the length of the image. And then we created dynamic composition or audioscape, which is completely related to where the audiences are looking at any point in time. This is the curator of that particular exhibition. So it's a kind of pan-aesthetic experience which not only emulates traditional hand scrolls but also transforms a visitor's involvement in an interactive and non-linear interface. And this shift is a fundamental shift in how we go from linear to non-linear systems. And it's really fundamental in the reframing of museography and future cinema. So another project that is just at the beginning, so I thought I'd introduce a few things that we're busy with as of today. So this is the battle of the Swiss Confederates and her allies, and Burgundy and her allies in the 16th century. It was a giant panorama that was painted in 1893. It's 100 meters long by 10 meters high. The last time it was displayed, Jean Nouvel, the French architect, built a box for it in 2002, and they floated it on the lake and they restaged it. It had been conserved. It took about 8 years, and you could see this enormous platform with that wee guy up there undertaking the conservation and restoration of this giant object. And so that giant object arrived from the Swiss military bunker where it had been stored for the last 20 years in my laboratory. There are 3 scrolls like this, or 3 sections, and it's now in the lab to be imaged. So we have sponsorship by phase 1 with a 150 megapixel camera, and we will attempt hyperspectral imaging of it, we hope, with them, and it will create an image which is will have about 400,000 images stitched together in it, and it's estimated that it's probably for the largest image ever created of a single object. So that will keep us busy for quite a few months. It's not a flat image, so we have to build the barrel, much as you see in the conservation image. This is arced barrel to roll it over. So we have mechanical engineers building that platform to hold the camera rig. We will also do not a conservation treatment, or at least review of the entire thing. So that's a big project we're about to begin. There will be a series of valorization projects for various museums, and it will also go into major train stations across Switzerland in some panoramic form that I haven't quite figured out yet. So moving to computational archives, as I mentioned, we've moved from classification to remix. We have new definitions of archive that sort of started with Michel Foucault, and as an instrument of power and knowledge, and then moving to archive fever, which was about mechanization and digitization, and dendritic classification. And now we're in this remix or remediation of the archive. And this challenges the paradigmatic and orthodox models of stewardship and offers up opportunities for co-production. And we need new interfaces for this, new prosthetic architectures for public engagement with this cultural memory that they can access. So there's just a few examples here. This first one is addressing the fact that only a fraction of the collections of any organization are on display. Most are hidden from view. So I have a statistic that says at the Smithsonian's there's only 2% of the objects on display, but the British Museum is 0.4%. At the Museum Victoria, for whom this was built, they've got 16 million objects and they show 0.8%. So it's a giant data browser for 100,000 objects. It's an export from the content management system. Took us 15 minutes to get the material. The museum owns a 360 3D system. It's distributed across 18 themes, and it attempts to bring together Indigenous history with social history and natural sciences. These are not normally put together. They're temporally distributed in these themes, but you can travel in the Z-axis as far as the eye can see because there's so many images. You can zoom into the images. You can access, it makes a Wordle of the description of the object, but then you can access the original record. And most importantly is that it takes these links out to other themes throughout the collection. And there are challenges here where how you glue up metadata statements that contain, when you're just dealing with an export like this, but that's a whole other narrative. And it operates as a real-time curating machine where you'll always be presented with the unexpected. And what it doesn't have, which it could easily have, but for public, it doesn't have a text-based search engine. So these are strategies for forcing a serendipitous browsing where you start anywhere and you end up somewhere. So sort of playground of the museum storehouse. And this goes into other interfaces that we've built. So this particular project addresses the fact that audiovisual archives are the major memory records of the 20th and 21st century, and their sheer size and temporal nature makes them extremely difficult to access, and how meaningful engagement with this material can really be brought to the fore for mass public. So this demonstrator, and it was built as an artwork, but it leads on to a lot of other projects we're now doing, is 24 hours of free-to-air broadcast TV footage from Australian TV, so not particularly highbrow stuff. We analyzed the footage with software, and every time there was a camera angle change, there was a cut made in the movie. And so we ended up with a database of 25,000 clips, and they're about 4 seconds each. So then we hired 4 able-bodied young men to hand tag all of these with extremely idiosyncratic metadata. It took about 3 weeks. Emotion, expression, physicality, speed, scene structure. These are very subjective tags. You could use computer vision or machine learning to look at gender, color, and so on today, but most of these couldn't be generated out of a machine, even so. And then we stream 500 simultaneous streams of video to the 360 system. Just remember it's in 3D, so everything is distributed in a 3D space. And then you can operate on the database. So you click on any image and it brings everything that's semantically most similar to one side of the screen. Everything that's most dissimilar appears behind you. And again, it's this kind of pan-aesthetics or aesthetic transcription where you move a particular form or media type from one form to another. He'll demonstrate how it works here. This is old to remember, so the interface is a bit clunky, but he's going to click on color to show you how it works. So it will bring all the high luminosity, which is actually a computer vision tag, enabled tag, all the fiery red stuff to one side, all the black and whites or the titles of these movies and all the credits are behind you. And you can add clips together to create your own movie. So this is recombining the narratives of different movies, recombinatory narrative, as it's known.
I wondered if there was somebody on the other side of the universe.
Nostalgic.
Like right now.
And it's been applied, the whole framework has been applied to different archives when people want a sort of fun way of getting into their archive. Then we moved on to build this, which is, it's based on EPFL's Memory of the World, UNESCO Memory of the World digitization project of the Montreux Jazz Archive. So it's 11,000 hours of video. And this installation cuts, remixes, and replays 5,400 artists and 13,000 videos from this total archive. And the neural net type image, the spaghetti, is based on the social network of the particular performers, and the link strength is defined by the number of times one artist played with another. So at the very center of that network is a particular artist. You will know who he is. Does anybody hazard a guess? B.B. King is at the center. He's more collaborative than anybody else in the music sense. So visitors are lying under the dome. They've got a spherical ball in their hands which has a single button on it. And this spherical interface is used to navigate the constellation, emulating the hemisphere of the full dome in which it's staged. The next image is a bit misleading because it was a prototype interface, so don't worry, it's changed. It has 2 buttons, but we went to 1. And the paradigm of searching is like tuning a radio, searching by listening to music. And it really circumvents the lack of public knowledge into who the jazz greats are. We have this whole archive showing on campus, and what we find is that everybody looks for Ella Fitzgerald and B.B. King, and so you'd end up with 5 videos being shown endlessly. So how do you get people to explore in a different way? So when they hear what they like, the design will unfold. So they get a sample of all the songs, then they get all the songs by that performer, and then they can access the original song from the beginning. And as a result of all of that work, we now have a new project, which is Narratives from the Long Tail, which includes about 120,000 hours of video, and from different collections, including the whole of Swiss TV, the Mutoscope collection from the Eye Museum in the Netherlands, which is a wonderful medium format, which has been scanned at 8K, the Montreux Jazz and the Olympic collections, sections of the Olympic collections. And we're looking at archival semantics, narrative visualization and experimental museology, this whole framework. And it's extensively underwritten by machine learning experts at the EPFL who are looking inside the images. So we have metadata, lots of it, but we're trying to look inside the images to produce new modes of access and inter and intra-image visualization. And kind of, we refer to it as an operationalization of the archive. The next section is really related to deep mapping and Cardo criticism. The theorist Rob Kitchen, he said an emphasis on absolute space based on Euclidean coordinates frustrates the humanist's desire to understand or effort to understand how spaces change over time and how spatial relativities emerge and develop into narrative, and that we need to reconceive interpretations of the map as moving, embodied, social, technical, and emotive, and as opportunities to represent alternative visual solutions to the specific problems of depicting and describing places and time. Conceiving of maps through a deep mapping schema posits that they're never fully formed. They're not static, but they emerge in navigational processes where everything is on the move. And the demonstrator here is the Atlas of Maritime Buddhism. It's based on the compelling spread of Buddhism from India through the seaports of Southeast Asia and the South China Sea, supported by archaeological and historical evidence which has never been brought together before. The spread of Buddhist doctrines from India to China triggered a profusion of cross-cultural exchanges that had major impact on Asian and world history. And this atlas has profound contemporary relevance, of course, to the socio-economic and political transformation of the world in the Chinese government-led One Belt, One Road project. So the atlas is counterbalancing narratives that have neglected the importance of Pan-Asian maritime countries and Buddhist entrepreneurship in the expansion of trade from the 2nd century BC. It's a big, long narrative, so I'll just briefly go through it. Sailors were obviously promulgating this along with intrepid monks from China and present-day Indonesia. They played very key roles in these exchanges, and monks such as this one who traversed from China through the maritime routes to Srivijaya, Kedah, Malaysia, and up into the great Buddhist universities in northern India. So our atlas starts in the rock-cut caves of India, and we're really looking at how we can create an information visualization framework for interactively exploring these incredible materials in various ways. So this is Ajanta in India, and to bring this narrative of the maritime Buddhism into the public domain for the first time, we collected hundreds and hundreds of sites across 8 countries, thousands of locations were recorded in 3D and panoramic spherical imaging. To say this is a research grant, very small kit, only 3 of us doing it, ambisonics and these camera rigs. We're actually shooting on analog, which is an interesting need, because the analog camera can rotate a lot faster than the digital equivalent because it can't write the files fast enough. So we need speed when we're dealing with stereographics, because if anything is moving, you've got blurry stuff, and people don't like blurry 3D. So a range of tools, somewhat off the shelf, and ambisonics for a 3D architecture of sound. We're also recording contemporary Buddhist practices as an adjunct, different forms of imaging here. This is in Bihar with a pilgrimage to the site at Bihar. And also in the field photogrammetry. So we did a lot of this with all the major national museums and various other site museums throughout the region. And this is Jai Varman's 7th from Angkor in Cambodia, National Museum of Cambodia. And just to give you an insight into this vast collection of material, Shwagadong Pagoda in Yangon, gigapixel imaging. Here the standing Buddha at Mandalay. He's predicting where Mandalay will be established in the plains below. This is a far-flung site at Sanati. It's a 1st to 3rd century stupa, and it depicts King Ashoka, who transformed India with the written word. The great Buddhist universities, many of which are UNESCO World Heritage Sites. This is Nalanda in Bihar, which flourished in the 5th century. Anuradhapura in Sri Lanka. This stupa was one of the largest brick structures in the world. Gilvahara, which is in Polonnaruwa in Sri Lanka, with this gorgeous Sinhalese rock carving. And the mist encapsulated Borobudur and monsoonal Ayutthaya. So it went on and on and on, including China. And we haven't, because of COVID, done Korea and Japan. But we decided to proceed to make the exhibitions because Korea and Japan are actually at the very end of the story, so we could legitimately do that. And we've had 3 exhibitions so far. This one, the one in Taiwan is permanent, and it's currently receiving about 10,000 people a day. So it's really very phenomenal. A big exhibition in Hong Kong and a touring exhibition in Chengdu in China. So these are just shots. We're combining real objects with their virtual cousins, if you like, in various forms: 360, 3D, linear navigators, eye domes for entering inside the rock-cut caves, and also video sequences. So a whole range of modalities, of course, with big scholarly texts that are associated with it. This is quite fun and playful. The gigapixel imaging were transformed into a easily accessible QR code-based spherical image, which you could do on an iPad or on your phone, depending. So of the Buddhist and Buddha sculptures that we collected, many of them have never been seen outside their country of origin before. They're really very interesting collection, and as this collection grows, there are opportunities in it, I think, for machine learning type activities that look at iconographic change over time, distributed across regions. But of course, the data set needs to be a lot bigger before we can do this. This is an installation that's really derived from this collection, and it allows people to rotate a human scale viewing platform in circumambulation, and it generates a dynamic temporal sequence that reveals each of the, in this case, 15 sacred sculptures one by one. And reversing the platform actually reveals these new materialities where icons melt, fragment, and refold in a series of computer graphic transformations and parametric visualizations. And it's a meditation on the double truth, the 2 truths in Mahayana Buddhism, the truth of the mundane and the absolute, and also the whole history of sculpture. Art history understands the double truth of sculpture, which is both a noun and a verb. It's sonified with a whole range of ethnographic recordings from each country where the object is from. So there's quite a lot of archival scholarship in the back of this artwork, derivative artwork. Okay, this project I'll briefly go through. Because it's also one of these ones that we're only just at the beginning of, but it's also one of the reasons I'm here in Washington. So this is the Universal Exhibition 1867. It was a very important exhibition, understudied so far because this was the moment that America came into the European world stage and said, look at our industries post-Civil War, and move aside nice decorative arts. We've got industry. So it's really, America played a very pivotal role at that time. And we have so far been working with a whole range of the stereographic pairs, and I know the Library of Congress has some of these. Some of them are printed on cards, such as this. We do automatic stereographic correction, denoising, upscaling in some cases, depending on where the source comes from. We also have some plates like this, which of course are much, much better quality. We've been doing recoloring experiments that sort of started like this, but which seemed quite crude, but in fact it's related to the source image, of course, and this is really quite spectacular. And by the time you project these images in a 3D stereographic system, this recoloring actually has really profound effect. So it's been quite a good discovery. It doesn't work for everything, that is for sure. It recolors the faces of white sculpture to be nice fleshy pink color. So it will be for the 360 system, and it's a collaboration with the Carnavalet Museum in Paris, which is the Museum of Paris, the Orsay Museum, and we hope the National Museum of American History. This is just one aspect of the many things that will be put into this show, and I can just briefly show you what we've done here. This is very preliminary because these are not until 2026, these exhibitions, but we've been able to geolocate all of the, so far, I mean, these are just a fragment of the images that we have. We have about 8,000 stereo pairs. But we can geolocate them on the map. We created just a wireframe to be able to do that. And then one is traveling around inside the architecture and you encounter these stereo views. There will be texts everywhere, which are actually dynamic text lifted from the legends of the old maps of these. So it's very beginning, very schematic, but it will be a huge archive of these stereo images viewable in a stereo system. And of course, not all museums can have the 360 system, so we will atomize it into a series of 5-meter wide screens. Very simple interfaces. The only overhead here are the passive stereo glasses. And just briefly to end, because I know we are running out of time, Deepfakes Art in its Double. This is the museum that I direct and am lead curator of in Switzerland. It's Kengo Kumar building. And it really blends experimental curatorship with contemporary aesthetics, open science, digital humanism, and emerging technologies. It was inaugurated in late 2016, and I've been running it since 2017, and this is our latest show. So I'll read you the curatorial text as a sort of summary of what I've been talking about, and then we can stop. So you'll just see slides of the show here. So the exhibition took the provocative title Deep Fakes, yet it opposes the popular uses of deepfakes for manipulation and misinformation to explore very different perspectives, reimagining objects through advanced computational techniques. And these slides show this, and I will explore some of the curatorial themes. So decades of computer science and engineering have revolutionized the tenets of verisimilitude and representation. Today's perfect pixels coalesce in imaging techniques designed to replicate cultural objects with ultimate fidelity. Simultaneously as algorithms and computer vision reperform and reprocess the digitally visible, they're exposing the optical unconscious of art, calling us to re-examine once again objecthood itself. Remediated through participatory interfaces such as mixed, augmented, and virtual realities, Deepfakes art and its double creates new performative platforms for the complex archetypes that emerge out of computational practices as they intersect with art heritage. There were 21 installations in this show, and the exhibition is equally focused on affirming and activating visitors' sensory experiences, while also grappling with the critical implications of digital materiality that objects possess in post-original form. Cultural deepfakes have manifold significance. They're technologically empowered to offer forensic insights into invisible dimensions, generating unforeseen hypotheses and connections. These art science phenomenon also propagate powerful auras which rise to the surface entangled with the effective qualities of the originating sources. Such augmented replicas are able to draw us into unparalleled tactility with the textures, patinas, and geometries of their counterparts. With its propensity for peripheral vision, machine learning has amplified the possible futures for curatorial and artistic practices, antagonizing outdated notions of authority, authenticity, and access. These practices are generating perpetually new archival forms that are both, or entities that are both formed and formless. Digital facsimiles also decolonize matter as they defy hegemonic narratives, helping to liberate things from their colonial entrapments, confronting authoritative discourses, historical sedimentation, and contested social relations. In cases of heritage at risk due to warfare, iconoclasm, and climatic catastrophe, digital copies have enabled communities to become more resilient to loss. They can also provide reservoirs of cultural memory and instruments for those on the margins to speak back to their oppressors. Vital issues for cultural deepfakes include how the encryption of digital counterparts in place of originals is exploding codes and ownership, the systems of ownership, custodianship, and repatriation. Meanwhile, the accumulation and exploitation of digital patrimonial and cultural capital by technological elites unnervingly reenacts colonial constructs. Synchronously, new forms of cryptographic control, such as non-fungible tokens, are being enabled for the network circulation of art. Promoting the blockchain as a potential dominion of arbitrary value is the hallmark of the intensification of late capitalism's newest investment for its enmeshed cultural objects rather than their depropriation in the commons. Deepfakes art and its double is a cumulative narrative that embarks on these cross-cutting themes, traversing the simulacrum, mirror worlds, digital twins, cryptocurrency, and machine intelligence, while engaging with those older issues of mimesis, reenactment, memory, and decolonization. The exhibition's installations cycle us through some of the antithesis around which the history of art has been circumscribed. As postmodernism recedes, taking with it the assumed meaning of things, cultural deepfakes have become a central pivot for this dialectic. Recognize the importance of cultural deepfakes opens up a way to redefine the dominant technocultural logic of our contemporary era. And this exhibition includes seminal objects of Pan-Asian art and architecture from China, Cambodia, India, Malaysia, Japan, Sri Lanka, and Thailand. The Middle East and Northern Africa are represented by important sites in Egypt, Syria, and the Sudan, the United States, and significant European heritage sites in Armenia, Germany, and Italy, complete an encyclopedic offering made tangible through state-of-the-art imaging and interfaces that support interactive immersion. So thank you very much.
I'd like to open up for questions. I know I have a number, but just stunning to go through all those, and I think a few of us are looking for extra budgets coming FY23. Questions?
I don't have a question, but I have a comment. I'm going to guess why we wouldn't have guessed B.B. King, because I would have thought of him as a blues performer. I would have never thought him in the jazz genre.
Right.
So that coming
Yep.
from Chicago, that's why I would say I would
Okay.
have never thought of him as
Okay.
in the jazz category.
So the Montreux Jazz Archive has, in fact, lots of rock and pop and things. So we took a section of that archive, which includes blues, actually. So we took a range of genres, but no rock and pop, which is why we had a subset of the data. Yeah.
So, oh, sure.
No problem. I'm quite loud though on my own. So this was beautiful. So my question is for the domes and the demonstrators that you were discussing. I'm interested, how much interpretation do you give people before they sort of enter a dome?
Sure.
You know, of
Sure.
like, or do you just allow that to be just an experience that sort of washes over them? I'm sort of interested in that sort of tension, right?
Yeah,
Between like how much
absolutely.
do you guide and how much do you
Yeah.
just release?
So, I mean, there's a huge amount of scholarship behind all of these objects, obviously. And, but my experience would show that if you start to label everything inside these experiences, you completely switch off people's embodied relationship with that object, right? So what we tend to do, I mean, there are always catalogs with these exhibitions, always wall labels, always QR codes, and we rely on that additional way of augmenting this experience, but we keep the experience very pure in a sense, to as if you were really there. And it is a tension, but there are multiple ways to deliver information. And if you try to combine it, and we've seen that throughout the history of sort of multimedia in museums, where they try to combine the info layer with the experience layer with the image layer. And we've got very, very powerful tools. And I think the success of these works is about how much you don't use, how many of these great techniques you don't use, because you keep that moment of engagement very, very clean and very, yeah. They're also, because they're fully embodied systems, you know, on the one-to-one scale, they're often 3D. There's so much information. They're so information rich, visually, sonically. There's a lot to engage with, and will spark people's interest, which they might not otherwise. Yeah, and so then we use all the other axes to give the didactic stuff. Yeah.
Well, thank you very much.
So this was amazing. I got to see a little bit of it during archiving, and to see even more now is phenomenal. And just watching some of the stuff, like how far have you guys gone into basically recreating things that don't exist anymore, things that have been destroyed for one reason or another, or even legends that we question whether they existed in the first place or not?
Sure. So we have done that, especially in the, I guess, the early days of, I did a big project for Intel for the Olympic Games, and it was a recreation of Olympia using massive amount of scholarly work. And we rebuilt in computer graphics the entire place. And actually that was a moment, so we did a big website. It was a web outfitter service website for Intel, so very high end. But there was an opportunity also to put this 3D reconstruction into an exhibition full of objects that had just come from Athens at the Powerhouse Museum for the Games. And this moment was one, this tension or also augmentation of the objects with this digital reconstruction was incredibly powerful. And it's the moment that I realized that I wanted to get off the web and back into gallery space, because I found that really, really the best mode of expanding the museographic framework for these objects. So we do it. We also, there was a period there where almost every museum would say, oh, we want to animate our paintings, right? That tradition is tailing off because it's incredibly expensive to do extremely well. So we did a couple of really big projects in animation. Now we do, we're doing lots of different things. So we're using all the latest virtual production techniques for rebuilding objects or bringing paintings to life or whatever. And with the big new panorama project, we will do the reconstruction of people and costumes in 3D using computer graphics and the latest in cloth simulation and things like that. But, we have military historians working on this as well. So it's all informed, correctly informed as far as it can be. So it's a range of techniques.
Harrison.
So when you're bringing collection objects into the digital space, to what degree are you looking for visitors to look past the technology you're using to display them at the object themselves?
So basically, that's what it's all about. The interface should be more or less invisible or naturalized, right. to an extent. And so many of them look quite simple. They're not gadget button pushing multimedia type interfaces. They're really sort of, I would say, refined in that sense. So it's about the interface disappearing and the object is then visible. And there are different ways to treat that object in a forensic sense or in a spatial sense or in a temporal sense. So there's ways to engage with it. So I think that's very much what we're attempting to do, is to reveal that object. People don't often, because a lot of old people will use our stuff, it's not considered to be techie in a museum. We've got a lot of visitor studies, and we had 2 PhDs written on one work, big technical interface, and old ladies would spend up to an hour drifting around in this virtual world. And they'd come back to the museum up to 5 times to do that. So it has a real engagement or an openness for older people, which is not typically associated with technology. Yeah.
I think that's so interesting because I liked your reference to the democratic access. Where often people can't get into the buildings, and we're all thinking a lot about lowered visitorship to physical areas, and then how we engage that with the online. And I think it's a really interesting dichotomy.
Sure. I mean, connecting these systems to the online network, we've talked about it for ages, is quite difficult. But the potential is huge. So you can imagine the Montreux Jazz archive being augmented by the open link data set of the American Jazz archive. And so the potential to bring these worlds together is really great. Yeah.
One last question.
All right, I'm going to take it. I don't need it. I really can project. I have no problem projecting. Oh, I didn't know you were recording. Okay, sorry. So the question I have is, you showed these nice young gentlemen doing tagging early on in one of the things. Yeah. There is some work being done, or there has been in the past, on what we would call video mining. Sort of like the same idea of text mining. And you showed like a word cloud, same idea.
All right.
So thought of video mining maybe, and then getting into machine learning as opposed to doing these artificial tagging is kind of where I'm thinking maybe I know you said this was a while ago, so I was thinking of that as maybe an outgrowth of that.
So that project is 20 years old, that one with the hand tagging. So machine learning wasn't really a well-used technique. But what we are doing, and it's really interesting because the certain collections have, as we know, really great human-tagged material, which is hugely informative for machine learning development. And I think it's one of the big cards that the archive sector has to play in the technology sector, because of the human tagging, they can really inform new forms of algorithm that are less biased, that are, and so on. And this, I see it with one of our collections in particular, which has been tagged with 15 fields of emotion. So they're describing what's going on emotionally. And for the machine learning guys at EPFL, this is just like paradise to have this material and to have hundreds and hundreds of hours of this material. So the information from the archive world is so important for the next generation of these tools. So we are attempting to do that. What it allows the machine learning guys to do is to develop an algorithm that will then accurately tag incoming video with the correct emotional tags. It's quite a phenomenon. Yeah.
I know I could go another 4 hours on this, and I know we all could. I wish we had more time. I'm hoping we can get you back sometime next time you visit.
Well, next time I visit, yes.
So could you please join me? A huge round of applause.
Thank you.